Hello, everyone. We will be discussing Chapter 5 today, the diseases and disease-producing organisms. Okay, so what we'll be looking at in Chapter 5 are a number of topics, and if you look at the overview, you can see where we'll be going today. Some of those items we will be going in more depth than others. Some of the key terms, and then the learning objectives for the various studies of disease and disease diagnosis, treatment, and prevention, as well as some of the types of infectious diseases, and the study of some of the microorganisms, as well as included in that would be parasitic worms. Then we would have control for the microbial growth, and then the laboratory identification. And I'm moving ahead. Okay, so when we study disease, we look at what is disease as a definition, and so it is an abnormality of any structure or function or part of an organ or a system. It can be felt or observed by others, and it may have a known or unknown cause, and it has a various severity of effects. So some of the categories in terms of disease are infection, degenerative diseases. Some of those things might be the nutritional diseases, some metabolic disorders like gout or diabetes, some immune disorders, which could be things like AIDS or multiple sclerosis. Neoplasms, as you know, are cancer, and then of course some psychiatric disorders as well. So rheumatoid arthritis is a type of degenerative disease, and it is hereditary, and it actually wears out the joints. Some of the disease causes, as you well know, some of these things can be caused by age, which is just related to tissue degeneration, because we become less active and less capable of performing some normal functions as we age. And then gender, which there are some diseases that are more preponderous amongst men, like heart disease, and women are more predisposed to some immune disorders. And then, of course, we have some living conditions and lifestyles. For instance, diabetes, not diabetes, but it can lead to type 2, but that would be obesity. And then emotional disturbances, you know, if we live in environments that have a lot of stress, and then also some physical and chemical damage, as well as some pre-existing illnesses that we might already have, especially like high blood pressure and diabetes. Epidemiology is the study of the cause of a disease, and there are several things that we look at. Incidence rate, which is the number of new disease cases that appear in a given population, and then the prevalence. So it's the overall frequency of that disease in a given group. And then, of course, the mortality rate, which would be the percentage of the population that dies from that disease. Now, disease categories can be epidemic, endemic, or pandemic. If it's epidemic, that means that it is more global. It is found, occurs, and it occurs throughout a population. And then, of course, if we have an endemic um, disease, then that would be one that's found in a lesser extent or area or a lesser extent of the population. But it does occur in a particular area, like maybe the flu. And then, of course, pandemic would be in an entire country or worldwide, and things like that could be AIDS. The influenza pandemic of 1918 killed thousands upon thousands of individuals, and that was worldwide. And it was spread during World War One by soldiers, but it went worldwide. So some of the checkpoints and things about like what is a disease. So it's, again, a disease is any kind of a pathological illness that occurs, and it causes the individual to fall from health. Some of the categories of these different diseases are, again, the infectious diseases, degenerative, nutritional, the metabolic, immune disorders, those neoplasms, as well as some psychiatric disorders. And then several predisposing causes would be like age, gender, heredity, the living conditions, and all of that. And then to identify the three types of statistically typical identification or information by epidemiologists, that would be the incidence rate, the prevalence, and the mortality rate. So now when we look at disease diagnosis, treatment, and prevention, there are some terms that we use, and then also we are concerned with complementary as well as alternative types of medication. So when a doctor is going to make a diagnosis, he looks for various symptoms, and those symptoms involve any type of sign or condition that the patient is presenting with, as well as some of the syndromes, which is like a complex disorder or a cluster of symptoms that would identify a given disease that would help in the diagnosis. So now diseases can be classified as to whether or not they're acute, which is that they're relatively severe, but for short-term. Chronic is that they're less severe, but they're likely to be continuous, or they reoccur over long periods of time. And then subacute is an intermediate between acute and chronic. So it's not as severe as a chronic, but it's not as short-lived as an acute. Then, of course, the prognosis is what the doctor generally gives to the patient in terms of what is the outcome for this diagnosis. So some of the treatments that we have are, of course, the standard Western forms of medication, surgery, and then other things like physical therapy, occupational therapy, less intrusive sorts of routes, like the respiratory therapy, nutritional therapy, and as well as counseling and support. Then we have physical therapy, as I said, that is always going to develop and maintain and restore movement for the individual. And then some of the other complementary and alternative medications are these. The naturopathy, which looks at people healing themselves from altering their lifestyle. A chiropractor, you know, he manipulates and corrects any misalignments in the musculoskeletal area. And then, of course, we have acupuncture. That's an ancient Chinese form of inserting some thin needles into the body at specific points that are supposed to promote healing. And then, of course, we have biofeedback, which teaches people to control any of their involuntary responses, such as heart rate and blood pressure. Exercise, massage, yoga, all of those sorts of things are helpful as well. And then, of course, we always want to prevent any type of disease by not smoking, limiting alcohol use, eating healthy, maintaining a good, healthy weight, and getting some regular exercise. And of course, there are two world organizations and that operate to promote health, and that's the WHO, the World Health Organization, and then the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, which is in Atlanta. So, what is the identification of an illness called, and that is diagnosis, and then what is a symptom and a sign. Those are two methods by which we make a diagnosis. So when we look at infectious disease, we look at how are those infectious diseases transmitted from one host to another. Oftentimes they can fall into three different categories: pathogens, which are types of microorganisms like bacteria, viruses, parasites as well, and then the infection, which can cause an infectious disease, can either be localized or it can be systemic throughout the body. And then, of course, the modes of transmission can be direct from one person to another, or indirect, like it might go through a vector, like an arthropod, like a tick, from a deer to a tick to a human. And then also some of the ways that the infectious diseases enter into the body are through the skin, like if we have a break in our skin. Of course, if we inhale droplets of mucus that might harbor the cold virus, through our digestive system by ingesting contaminated foods or things, or it could actually go from the bloodstream into the digestive tract, like the flu. And then, of course, through the urinary and the reproductive systems, where we have some bacteria and even some parasites that can enter that way, as well as through the digestive tract. So these are some checkpoints that you just might want to go back over again. And then when we look at microbiology and the study of microorganisms, there are four basic types of organisms. We have a normal flora of organisms that are in our digestive tract, and of course we have some diseases that are caused by each type of microorganism. So the types of microorganisms are bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, and algae. And then here are some of the characteristics of each one of those organisms, and then some of the examples of those. So when we look at the normal flora, it's that population of any microorganism which is beneficial to the human being. And then, of course, bacteria themselves the characteristics of them are that they're single cell. They lack a nucleus, so they do not have their DNA enclosed within a nuclear envelope, and they're also found everywhere. So they are endemic to the given environment. There are 3 different types of bacteria, and those are the anaerobic, which do not require any oxygen, the aerobic, which can only live in an oxygenated environment, and then we have these things that are called facultative anaerobes. And those facultative anaerobes are ones that that are responsible for living, and they produce another form of energy, another chemical that can help with that, with their living, and so they do use that oxygen, but only when it's present, and if not, then it can switch the state and use another mechanism for obtaining their energy. Some of the specialized areas of bacteria are endospores. Endospores form when conditions are unfavorable, and they go into a dormant state, so they're not actively dividing at that point. Some bacteria have flagella, and then some actually have these things called pili, and they attach to and anchor to given surfaces so that they can invade a organism and make them sick. Here are some. Here's a picture of some endospores. Okay, so they form this capsule, which sort of protects them under harsh conditions until the conditions become favorable again, and then they will begin to divide and to actively reproduce. Here are some with flagella, and that's the whip-like tail. And then, of course, some of the bacteria are, well, all of them are given a given shape, and that helps to identify them. Cocci are round. The bacillus is rod-shaped. The Vibrios, those are ones that are short rods, but they have like a tiny curve, and it looks like a comma. Spirilla are like spiral shaped. Spirochetes, those are one that are similar to the spirilla, but they wave and they twist along. And then of course we have the rickettsia and the chlamydia, and these are they only exist inside of living cells, and so they are what we call obligate intracellular parasites, and they cause some really harmful diseases like Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and then typhus. And they are transmitted by the bites of insects, or sometimes by lice and ticks and fleas. And then the chlamydia, they're smaller than the rickettsia. However, they can cause serious eye infections and even blindness. So when we name the bacteria, you're not responsible for this, but the genus name, which is the one that's first, like say that we have Staphylococcus aureus. The Staphylococcus, the first word is the genus name, and it's capitalized and it's written in italics. Then the species name, which would be aureus and Staphylococcus aureus, that would be lowercase, and it would be in italics as well. And there's an example there. So these are some pictures of some staining of different types of bacteria. You're not responsible for knowing, these different names here, other than just the generalized shape. So cocci are round, and then the bacilli are rod-shaped. And then, of course, some of those curved rods, which are the spirilla, and then some of the spirochetes as well, which are like, these corkscrew looking kinds of things. Okay, and then these are some of the checkpoints that you can look over. And then when we look at another kind of disease organism, disease-causing organisms, such as viruses, they're very, 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 very small. They are smaller than bacteria. They have a nucleic acid coat, a core with a coat around it that's made out of proteins. They only can grow inside of living cells, so they are parasites, these viruses. And so if we look at a comparison between the viruses and bacteria, the viruses are off to the left over here, okay? And then this is the size of the bacteria. So they're very, very small. And again, the structure, we have a protein coat, which is around the outside, and then we have a nucleic acid core for a virus. These cannot live on their own, so they're not considered living because they need to have a host cell that they invade, and they're very specific to the type of cell that they will invade. For instance, like the cold virus will invade the epithelium of your respiratory tract. Okay, so, and those are the only cells. So that, they're very, very specific as to the cell type that they invade. And they actually take over, and they start producing more and more of their own virus particles that get released. Now, prions are a infectious organism, and it's composed solely of protein. Some of these can cause mad cow disease, as well as Jacobs Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disorder. Now, fungi is another class, and these consist of things like yeast, as well as molds. Here are some pictures of some of the fungi, and on the last one, that is thrush. Then we have protozoans, and these are larger, but they're found as single cells worldwide, and they're things such as amoebas, ciliates, flagellates, and this other one that's called apicomplexans. Some of the parasitic protozoans form cysts like the amoebas, and then they live in the intestinal tract. One that can live in your blood is called the trypanosome, and it causes sleeping sickness, and it has a vector that transmits it by the tsetse fly. And then others like the flagellus, that is one that can cause malaria, and that's like the Anopheles mosquito. It actually transmits the sporozoa into the red blood cells, and then it multiplies. So here are some checkpoints as well that you can look over. And then lastly here are some of the parasitic worms, and they invade human hosts. The study of parasites or parasitic worms is helminthology, and there are two different types. There are roundworms and there are flatworms. The roundworms, the Ascaris, pinworms, hookworms, and then some of the other types of worms that can cause disease are elephantiasis. Pinworms are in your digestive tract, and the hookworms enter through your feet. So here are some of those as well. This is Filarius, and it causes the disease of elephantiasis. So now flatworms, these are ribbon-like or leaf-shaped, and they're tapeworms and flukes. And tapeworms, I'm sure you all have heard of in the past. And there's a flatworm with a tapeworm. Some of the arthropods that can transmit disease, like ticks and mites and so forth. And these are some micrograph pictures of those. So some checkpoints that you can go back over, and then some of the control of these microbes. So we want to control the emergence and also the spread of any microorganisms. So, and we don't want it to increase throughout the world, and but we want to make sure that that it is controlled and it is kept confined. So the public health organizations actually look to sewage and garbage disposal, purifying our water, because some of these organisms can travel in our water and then we ingest it. Food contamination, as you all know, we've had several outbreaks of various foods being contaminated, and they recall them. And then, of course, pasteurization, which is heating to a high temperature so that we can kill any organisms. Sterilization, which when you sterilize something, what you're doing is you are providing like an autoclave, so that these organisms are heated under extreme pressure, and then they are killed. So most of those pathogens, and then of course to disinfect, we would be using some chemicals there like bleach, and then some of the aseptic methods that are used for microbial control, of course, are the autoclave, and then to disinfect, that's stepping into bleach, and then of course using alcohol and antimicrobial soap, and then hydrogen peroxide directly onto living tissue. So the major method by which we can control microbial growth is through hand washing, and then we have some antiviral agents that are used, that the drugs actually prevent like a virus from replicating by inhibiting the ability of that virus to make its protein coat that encases its nucleic acid core. So, and then here are some checkpoints again that you might want to look over. And then I'm not going to go into the laboratory identification. The only thing that you probably need to be at least aware of for terminology is some of the staining. So if you know that there is, or hear that there is a gram-stained bacterium that was gram-positive cocci, then you know that it was an infectious agent. Some of the things that they use to identify these microorganisms are dyes that they actually put on the slide, and it stains the bacteria. And of course, then this is the end and for chapter 5, and I hope that you have a good evening, and we'll see how things progress. Don't forget to take the objectives quiz, and also this will be part of the next exam, chapters 5, 6, and 7.